Welcome to the John T. Reed podcast. Nothing but Hurricane Harvey lately. Biggest thing we've been sort of annoyed by is this price gouging stuff.
We're annoyed not by the price gouging. We're annoyed by punishing the price gougers and suggesting there's something wrong with selling to the highest bidder. This is with regard to gasoline and other things that are in short supply in the area where Hurricane Harvey has caused so much damage. Basically, my position, and I think Dan agrees, is people who buy and sell things should be allowed to, the two consenting adults ought to be allowed to agree on a price, and it's nobody else's business. Any price ceilings, like rent control or anti-gouging laws and disasters, basically say to the seller who would sell at the high price, get out of here. And the buyer who would buy at the high price is not allowed to. It's not mandatory that you buy gasoline from some guy who's selling it for $10 a gallon in Houston. It's not mandatory. If you have an anti-price gouging law, he won't be there. If you really need gasoline, like take somebody to the hospital, you'd like to have the opportunity to buy the $10 a gallon gasoline, but you won't have it because they get told to not come. Same thing with minimum wage laws, which are floors on prices, but a floor has essentially the same effect as a ceiling. It eliminates the transaction in question. Poor people who are supposedly being protected by the minimum wage can't get a job because of it. They can't get a legal job. They go deal drugs instead. And if you would allow price gouging in Houston, all the shortages would be quickly overwhelmed by the animal spirits of capitalism. People from hundreds of miles around would be driving there with pickup trucks full of stuff. And you don't have to buy it. And if you do buy it, you're going to pay a big price. So that's what gave the guy the incentive to fill his pickup truck with that stuff and drive over there. But to say what he's doing is immoral or illegal is just plain stupid.
Yeah, the prices serve as a signal to outside areas that aren't in the disaster. Hey, send resources here. High prices are indicating this is where resources are needed for whatever reason. Low supply, high demand, both. And trying to control that, basically stating that the price is sort of arbitrary and that people can decide hundreds of or thousands of miles away what the correct price is. I think it's a luxury of our society that we have fairly stable prices, and people think that's normal. The price is the end of a long equation that we're lucky is pretty stable. But if any of the variables change, which they do in a disaster, the price should change. And pretending that it shouldn't is bad economics, and it results in that choice for suppliers. Do I go there and try to sell it at this arbitrary price that they say is the correct one, or do I not go at all? And they're not going to go at all. Some people don't believe that's the case.
If you've traveled abroad recently, you know that America is a fabulous place for low prices. If you go to an outlet mall near a major city, you frequently see busloads of foreigners getting off the bus to go buy stuff because the prices are so cheap here. And we have a fairly simple trick for having the cheapest prices in the world. It's called competition. And if you have price gougers, quote unquote, going into Houston with gasoline and water bottles and all that, and you're unhappy about the prices they're charging, you should encourage more price gougers to go there. And the competition between the price gougers will drive the price down. So the whole thing is all these demagogues, including this morning I heard former Governor Perry of Texas, who's the energy secretary. He said, if you go into the Houston area and price gouge on gasoline, we're going to get you. He knows better than that. But this is demagoguery, and pandering. Not totally, but I heard him speak in public. A lot of people in the old Confederacy are into this. I'm just a good old country boy. I don't know nothing about nothing. But the guy ran the state with the most strongest economy. He knows better, but it's pandering to the stupid, and the people who believe in this anti-price gouging stuff are both conservative and liberal. I can understand the liberals because I have an article on my website about what I call if laws. The liberals are always passing laws that say if you do X, you must do it this way, or if you do X, we will tax you. And they think what will happen is that people will continue to do X, but they'll do it the liberals' way, like the minimum wage law. If you're going to hire somebody, you must pay them at least $12 an hour. They think that's going to get people who are not making $12 an hour to get a raise. No, it's going to cause a whole lot of businesses to say, oh, okay, we'll stop doing X. And the same thing with the price gouging on gasoline and stuff in Hurricane Sandy or Hurricane Harvey. Competition will take care of prices. It may not always give you exactly what you want, but it will take care of prices, high prices, better than anything else. It's the worst way except for all the others.
Yeah, I'd say if you heard that somebody's gouging in Texas, then you go there and you sell it for whatever you think is the correct price.
Gouge minus $1.
Right, or however much you want to do it. But this idea that people have to risk thousands of dollars to altruistically provide Texas with resources at the same price they could sell it in their comfortable homes where it's not raining or flooded is ludicrous. It's bad economics. It's illogical, and the price mechanism is very powerful at communicating resources need to come here, and if you suppress it, they will not come.
There's a saying in economics. It's kind of a law of economics that profits beget competition, and excess profits beget ruinous competition. So what would happen if all these anti-gouger people, the politicians and all the others, said, hey, we need the gougers. If you want to gouge, come to Texas, come to Houston now. You can gouge, you can sell to the highest bidder, whatever the market will bear. Please bring your water, your food, your gasoline, your generators, et cetera, We want you gougers here. What would happen is that the stuff would become available overnight, greatly alleviating that problem, and the prices would plummet. And they would plummet to the point where the gougers would stop coming. The guy would do the numbers to say, well, I was going to drive from Arkansas to Houston and sell a pickup truck full of water bottles, but if there's now selling the water for only 15 cents more than normal, I'll stay home.
Right, yeah, it solves itself. But that high price causes the supply to go towards that location. And when the supply increases, the price will go down.
The higher the price, the more you will have an explosion of competition. So it'll be ugly for a day or two. But again, it's not mandatory. If some guy's selling $10 gasoline, you don't have to buy it. Now, if you really need gasoline and all the gas stations are closed, you're going to be thrilled to death. There's a guy there selling $10 gasoline.
Well, and there are other hypothetical side effects. If you keep the price of water or milk or whatever at the normal price during a crisis, the first person or the first 5 people that show up may decide to stock up and over purchase, and then your supply is decreased, and the poor person that shows up 6th, there's nothing left. If the prices were higher, the first 5 would not need to. They would say, okay, maybe I shouldn't stock up. And so, if the supply runs out at a given store and the roads are closed, you're screwed. Talking about how it's unfair for that that 6th person who's poor having to pay $20 for a gallon of milk when it should be $5. If there's no milk, you're not helping them any more than a $20 gallon of milk. It's economists say, this is not about solutions, it's trade-offs. And people talk about it, like you said, the if laws. They don't acknowledge the other side of the trade-off. They just look at the side they don't like and say, we need to solve this. It's like, well, what happens if you do? You cause other problems.
Well, economics is the study of transactions. And when you pass a floor law or a price floor or a price ceiling law like minimum wage or rent control, the liberals think this is going to make the transactions happen at the price that they think is appropriate, socially just, and all that nonsense. That is not what happens. What happens is the transactions cease completely. So it's this whole idea is a bunch of nonsense. So, with regard to hoarding, I wrote a book called How to Protect Your Life Savings from Hyperinflation and Depression. And one of the chapters is Advance Purchase and Sale. And what that says is we are likely to have a hyperinflation crisis in the future. And what will happen in the hyperinflation crisis is what is happening now in Venezuela. The value of the purchasing power of the money will plummet. The stores will raise their prices accordingly. The mirror image, the prices will go up to match the fall in the purchasing power. The demagogues in the government will pass price control laws, and the store shelves will empty. You've seen pictures in the media about the Venezuelan store shelves. So I said in my book, in the chapter called Advanced Purchase and Sale, roughly speaking, to protect, one of the ways you need to protect yourself from hyperinflation is to buy everything you'll ever need for the rest of your life now, while it's readily available at a low price. And what that means is buying long shelf life food, which you can get from the Mormons and from freeze-dry companies like Mountain House. You just store water. You could store it in your swimming pool. You can store it in a hot tub. You can store it in 2-liter plastic bottles. You can get fuel. Some of the things are a little trickier, like how do you get all the heating and air conditioning fuel you need for the rest of your life? Well, one way to do it is to buy a house in San Diego, or even in San Francisco.
Would it be reasonable to buy some shorter period of time with the plan, I'm going to leave here if it's still an issue?
Yeah, that's exactly the case. In my
You're simply illustrating it to the extreme, where
right.
you don't have to worry about, quote, gougers.
Well,
you already have everything.
Let me tell you what I have done. I don't have enough food for the rest of my life, but I have enough for 6 months. And I probably should jack that up to a year. The Mormons advocate that, and whatever you think about the Mormon religion in general, that is a good idea. It doesn't cost much. You're only talking about a couple $1,000s. I think probably most of my listeners here have hundreds of thousands of dollars of net worth, or hope to, and they're trying to put it in the right index funds and all that stuff. You're only talking about like $2,000 worth of freeze-dried food. But my plan, I have a bunch of water in the house. I have a bunch of food. But my plan would be to use that to transition out of the country. I read a whole bunch of books on hyperinflation in Germany and Austria and Israel and Zimbabwe and all that stuff. And we've had it in the United States during the Revolutionary War and the Civil War with the greenback dollar, and the Revolutionary War with the Continental, and a little to an extent after World War I. Usually you get hyperinflation, in the past anyway, because of war spending. But now we have war levels of spending for entitlements. And the good thing about wars in that regard is that they end. The entitlements do not. They just get worse and worse. So, but I would expect that if we got hyperinflation here and the store shelves empty, I would be doing two things. I'd be eating my food that I bought, long shelf life food, and I'd be getting myself and my wife to Canada. And then we have money in Canada, in Canadian dollars. We have money in Australia, New Zealand. And we could go to Canada and then from there go to anywhere we wanted in the rest of the world. But the people in Germany and Austria and these other countries that have had hyperinflation, what they needed to do was get out of the country. When the store shelves are empty, you cannot buy food, fuel, or medicine. You need to leave. They did not have the means to leave. And when you go to the border to leave a country with hyperinflation, the country you're wanting to enter is going to say, well, how are you going to support yourself over here? And you say, well, I have a lot of money. He's going to say, what kind of money? American dollars? And you say, yeah. And he's going to say, that's not going to get you anything over here. We're not going to let you in because you're just coming here as a beggar or trying to steal jobs from our people.
Well, yeah. The people in Houston, fortunately, can just head to Nashville or closer, Dallas. I got my geography off there, but whatever.
Nashville's a whole.
Yeah,
there's a few.
They don't
states.
have to cross too many borders to get out of Houston.
Well, and Texas is a big state.
Yeah,
you don't need to leave the state.
Well, what else about what's been going on in there? You mentioned there was a sort of a stark contrast between post Katrina and post Harvey.
Well, and during Katrina and Harvey, the salient Katrina thing is yelling at George Bush about aid. And another salient thing
did he send the correct amount or?
Well, they've done some postmortems.
That's a subjective.
Well, they had a Democrat mayor and a Democrat governor, and I think and a Democrat media. So any problems that were any molehills were turned into mountains and blamed on George Bush. But and then before Katrina happened, the federal government gave New Orleans a whole lot of money to strengthen the levees or raise them higher and all, and they spend it on other stuff because they're corrupt. In Dallas, you do have some problems because of a lot of wetlands were paved over and roofed over. Where there used to be a wetland that would absorb excess rain, now you've got concrete streets and roofs, tile roofs and stuff, channeling the, saying to the water, go somewhere else,
right,
instead of letting it soak into the ground.
Soak it up, but now it's redirecting it. Yeah.
But the people of Houston have done us proud. They made us proud to be Americans, just like the people of New York City at 9/11. I don't remember feeling any pride in much of what happened in New Orleans in Katrina. And Houston, by the way, invited a whole lot of refugees from New Orleans to come to Houston. I think they stayed in one of their sports stadiums, and a bunch of them stayed too long. So I think there's that the Texans have made us proud. I don't recall. I mean, certainly some people in New Orleans and Louisiana did good things, and there are people now in Texas doing bad things like looting. But generally, the general tone was, politics, and Bush and all that, and woe is us. And in Texas,
help us. And Texas is more. We got this.
Yeah, we appreciate the help. We use some help, but we're
step forward.
We're not waiting for it.
Right. Yeah. They just
proceed. I'm not a big fan of Texanness. Right. But when you put out a bunch of BS, which you also see in the military and the Marines and the airborne, when you beat your chest and say how great you are a million times, when the crisis comes, you sort of have to live up to it, and they have in Texas. They painted themselves into a corner where they're supposed to be hot stuff, and then when they got hit with Harvey, I think they had a little voice in their head saying, well, we're Texans, so we've been telling everybody how great we are. We need to actually be great. And so they had given themselves something to live up to all these years. And then when the crisis hit, they lived up to it. Good on them.
What's the casualty count at this point?
A couple dozen last I heard, maybe 3 dozen. And they had a huge hurricane in Galveston in I think around 1900. It's 6,000 to 12,000 or 6,000 to 8,000 people died, something like that. Yikes. So that's the advantage of modern communications and satellite weather analysis and all the building codes. Building codes.
Yeah. They're not getting knocked down by the hurricane.
But the damage, the dollar amount of damage in Houston, probably far more than the hurricane that killed the 6,000 to 8,000 people.
Sure.
But anyway, the Wall Street Journal just had an article saying that Katrina, New Orleans never fully recovered. They had a population of 450,000 when Katrina hit, and it's been 400,000 since. A whole lot of people left and didn't come back. And the economy in New Orleans is essentially tourism. But the economy in Houston is extremely diversified. They have a very
oil and other things.
They have a very advantageous location with regard to proximity to oil wells and pipelines and ports. They got ports coming out their ears in Texas. It's I gave my son a book, which is sitting here under the microphone. It's called The Accidental Superpower. It's about geography. The United States has 14,000 miles of navigable waterways. The second best country for that is 2,000 miles, and that's Germany and China. The United States has more navigable waterways than all the rest of the world combined. And if you count the inland waterway that runs from New York City all the way around Florida to the Mexican border, it's 17,600, I think, miles of navigable waterways. And this, when the country started, this was like an enormous gift. It was this. You got the phrase in the America the Beautiful, God shed His grace on thee. In the 1700s, all those navigable waterways were the equivalent of an interstate highway system. We just arrived and we already had an interstate highway system.
Yeah, it was enormous for the economic growth,
and continues to. And Houston is one of the best examples. They have so many ports that some of them aren't used. There are other countries that have hardly any ports, huge countries.
Well, that in Houston reminds me of a stat I thought was interesting. I think Thomas Sowell, the economist, brought it up. He said back before, this is probably 100 years ago or early 1900s or something like that. There were areas in the Caucasus, in what would you call that? Eastern Europe,
Russia,
where they were getting their oil from Houston, something like, I don't know, what is it, 6,000 miles away or something like that.
Yeah.
They had oil fields 100 miles away, but it was cheaper to get it from Houston,
right? Because
there was water between the two,
right?
Having navigable waterways was a big part, and that's a big point of that book, The Accidental Superpowers, that having those natural resources, that natural, like you said, highway system, is a big part of it, and countries that have those. Another statistic was Africa's coastline is like twice that of Europe, but you can't put ports in Africa because it's smooth, whereas in Europe there's all these inlets.
Well, I think Brazil has hardly any ports, and I think it's got cliffs or something. I don't remember what the reason was, but you can't just build a port wherever you want.
Right.
And the United States, when the Pilgrims arrived, the United States also has a fabulous climate. For a big country, we have a great climate. Canada and Russia are larger, but they got a whole lot of snow and ice and frozen tundra. You can't live there generally. You can't get much. You maybe pump oil out of it, but that's about it. So the United States is in a general sense the biggest country in the world, not Russia or Canada or China, because within our country is a temperate climate. We got waterways out the wazoo. We got arable land where you can grow crops, on and on and on. We're really lucky in that regard. And Houston, there are so many ports that you could make in Texas. It exceeds the number of ports in most other countries. In other words, where you could turn it into a port because it meets the criteria. Most other countries have none or one or something, and Texas alone has a whole bunch of them. And Houston is the main example of that.
Yeah, does the geography of the Gulf kind of calm the waters for the most part for building ports, other than the occasional hurricane, obviously, but in general?
It's a little out of my expertise area. Generally, the Mediterranean is an interesting thing. We think of Italy and the French Riviera and all that as really nice weather. The latitude of those places is, I forget exactly what it is, but it's something like Nova Scotia. So when you get into a kind of a stagnant pond like the Mediterranean, the sunlight goes a long way, heats up the water and stuff. When you're along the Atlantic coast or the Pacific coast, you get these currents, these clockwise currents.
Right.
On the East Coast, it brings water up from the Caribbean and moderates the temperatures.
Yeah,
it
seems like the direction of the oceans makes it so that the West coasts are a little bit better than the East coasts.
Well, the currents and how big they are, and then here on the West Coast,
like Spain is similar to California, I think, as far as weather.
Spain is pretty nice, but its latitude. We live in the San Francisco area. You know what our latitude is equal to on the East Coast? I think it's Richmond, Virginia.
It's low, yeah.
We're in Northern California, and then the Germany and those countries, they're like at the same latitude as kind of Hudson's Bay, Canada, or something. But when you're in the Atlantic Ocean, I used to live in Wildwood, New Jersey, which is a he's checking the map here.
Spain and Portugal are pretty similar to Northern California.
Well, I'm looking at the map with you. It looks more like New England.
Maybe closer to Oregon.
Anyway, I used to live in Wildwood, New Jersey, which is a barrier island just north of Cape May, which is the southernmost point of New Jersey. Our ocean water was warmer because it's coming up from the Caribbean. Now I live near San Francisco, and we have the opposite. It's clockwise currents in both oceans. But now the water here where I live, and as I said, I'm at the latitude of Richmond, Virginia, much lower than New Jersey, and yet you can't swim in the ocean here because the water's coming down from Alaska. I don't even know if you can swim in the ocean. We just went to Santa Cruz, my son and his kids and his wife and I. Santa Cruz is south of here. The people were all over the beach. It was nice, hot weather, but they weren't in the ocean because it's too cold. And you can go all the way down to Santa Barbara, which is really nice weather. And I don't think they're too big on going to the water because there's a currents bringing it down from Alaska.
Well, maybe Santa Barbara, certainly LA. It's you can go in there. But yeah, surfers in Northern California got to wear wetsuits. It's just too freezing cold. Wanted to also talk about what's been going on with North Korea. One of the things, maybe you can give your thoughts, but I've thought the whole nuke craze was interesting in that people are like, oh, now maybe now they have a nuke and they can fire it at South Korea. Well, North Korea's had conventional bombs forever. Why were they not afraid of those? And I don't know. You can elaborate on.
Well, I'm a West Point graduate and a Vietnam veteran, and I went to Ranger School and a bunch of that stuff. I was not a big combat guy in Vietnam. I was a communications officer, so I wasn't roaming around with the infantry on search and destroy missions. However, I have a general feeling about this stuff that I think is more detailed than layman. The North Korean military is apparently very out of date. The conventional military, they're a very poor country. I think they have a lot of old weapons that you probably wouldn't normally have in a country that could afford better. I think a lot of their ammunition is past its expiration date. They are going with the nukes because they can't afford a conventional military, which they had a significant amount of in the Korean War in the early 1950s. They have a lot of artillery. My book, my novel, The Unelected President, discusses this a lot. But just listening nowadays, it seems to me the time for talk is over. We keep saying that, but as long as you're talking, if you're saying that all options are on the table, they're not. We'll know all options are on the table when things start exploding in North Korea. They have a bunch of tunnels reportedly. And I was in the Army. I was stationed in the U.S. and in Vietnam. I was never stationed in Korea, like a lot of Army people. But my impression is they have artillery, long-range artillery, and I was a communications officer of a long-range artillery battalion in Vietnam. They can shoot 25 miles or so. Long-range artillery, which are big, long-barreled guns. And my understanding is the North Koreans have a whole lot of them along the border in tunnels and caves. So we had a war against Japan in the Pacific in 1944, 45, and we had to spend a lot of time fighting against Japanese who were in tunnels and caves. And what we ended up at the end of the war, where we were best at it because we had so much experience, they would throw satchel charge. They would sneak up alongside the opening of the cave or the tunnel, and they would throw satchel charge in there. A satchel charge is about the size of like a stack of a couple of books, maybe books the size you would put on a coffee table. And it's in a cloth thing, and it's got like a strap on it. And it's essentially a hand grenade. You pull a pin, and it starts burning down, and you take hold of it by the strap and you throw it into the cave from the side of the entrance, and then you get the heck out of there. And it's a big explosion. So it seems to me we could take small drones and make them suicide satchel charge drones. And I assume we know where all the entrances, all these caves are. In the winter where it's really cold there, you could probably see them with infrared photography. If there are people in there, you would see little hot spots all over. I'm not certain about that. But so you fly these small satchel charge suicide drones in there, and that kills everybody. You could also do enough damage personnel wise with like a white phosphorus grenade or white phosphorus mortar type shell that you fly in with a drone. That's the one that explodes and it shoots out all these white streamers of burning phosphorus. Looks like a 4th of July type thing, but when that stuff gets on you, you can't put it out. It burns right through you. So that would deal with the guys in there. So that, all this fear that they're going to shoot a zillion artillery rounds into Seoul, you should have a simultaneous suicide drone attack into every one of those openings. And I think that could be done. I'm not certain of it, but I think it could be. And then I think we should declare a no-fly zone for missiles only over North Korea. So we keep seeing these pictures of these missiles lifting off the launch pad, and they're doing about 2 miles an hour, and then they're 10 miles an hour. We can spot those from our satellites because of the huge heat signature and the huge flame. And we could put armed drones, like Predator drones with Hellfire missiles. We could blanket the country. I believe I looked it up that the Korean Peninsula is the same size as Utah, and the North Korean portion would be about half the size of Utah. But so we can blanket Utah with armed Predator drones. And whenever the satellites say, whoop, there's a missile being launched, we could fire a Hellfire missile, a heat-seeking Hellfire missile.
Utah's way bigger.
Well, then Utah is the same size as the entire Korean Peninsula.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So you're talking about blanketing an area half the size of Utah with armed drones, and then the satellites, when they see the heat signature of the blast of the ICBM, you fire Hellfire missile at it from the nearest Predator drone. Hellfire missile is heat-seeking. It flies up the tailpipe of a jet, or in this case, a missile. And when that missile's doing 50 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, 600 miles an hour, I don't know the speed of a Hellfire, but it's probably, I know we have some missiles of that nature that are supersonic. Now, eventually, the ICBM gets to hypersonic speed, and they claim they can shoot it down when it's coming in. I'd rather shoot it down when it's leaving North Korea.
Yeah, get it early.
When Dan and I coached him in youth football, and then he helped me coach football. We used to play against the teams. They had like 5 guys faster than my fastest guy. So our defense was designed to swarm in on them while they were still in first or second gear. Because when they got into third gear, we were toast. And it's the same thing with these ICBMs.
Our kids didn't have third gear.
Well, we had a third gear, but it was a slow kids' third gear.
Took a while to get there. Yeah. So North Korea is about the size of Mississippi. It's a little smaller than New York. A little bigger than Louisiana, Tennessee, Ohio.
So we could blanket it with Predator drones, and all they do is look for missile launches. And whenever they see a missile launch, we hit the missile with a heat-seeking. We pull the missile, bring the missile down with a heat-seeking Hellfire type missile, which we've had for decades. And that's the end of that. Now, they would probably start going to anti-aircraft, but now that they're getting out of their strong suit because they can't afford much anti-aircraft. So they could shoot down our drones, but then we could say, all right, we're going to take out all your anti-aircraft. And this would not be a ground war. It would play to our strengths, our technology, and our the size and the wealth of our military. And it would go against their weaknesses, which is the basic principle of offense, both in football and in the military, is strength against weakness. You want to pit our strengths against their weaknesses. And we don't want to go in on a ground basis. Everybody seems to think us going to war with Korea means a repeat of the Korean War. Screw that. MacArthur was in charge of that, General MacArthur, and he said we should never fight a land war in Asia. Fine, don't. We tried it. Didn't work very well in 1950. So just get them from the air. It seems to me a simultaneous suicide drone attack on all those artillery positions, and you would want to do the same, have the no-fly zone for missiles. You do those two things to North Korea, I expect they would try to counteract it and would have some success. But generally, I think we would counteract their counteractions, and ultimately we can put 24 nuclear warheads on that country by firing 2 Trident II missiles out of one of our so-called boomer submarines. They might even be able to fire out of San Francisco Bay. So we could put 24 nuclear warheads on their air bases, their 2 naval bases, the Pyongyang neighborhood where Kim Jong-un lives. We could put 24 independently targeted nuclear warheads there by firing 2 missiles out of one of our boomer submarines. The submarine in question wouldn't even have to go off patrol. It would still have another, I don't know whether they have 12 or 24 missiles in the one submarine. But this would be a flick of our wrist. Yeah. And it would essentially obliterate Kim Jong-un, the person, as well as their naval and air bases. And what are they going to do? Do a ground attack with infantry without air cover, without artillery? That's not going to go very far.
Yeah, it seems like a static analysis similar to the price gouging and all the other stuff. It's people are focused on, oh, what if he gets a nuclear weapon? He could nuke someone. Well, what happens after he does that? He gets nuked back. And that second thing is going to likely prevent the first thing, unless he truly is a lunatic, like literally crazy. I suspect he's more shrewd than we're sort of told on a regular basis. He sort of mocked. His father was mocked pretty mercilessly by people like South Park and other stuff. I mean, the place is saying he shot I don't know what he say, shoot a 38 on a 18-hole golf course, which would break the all-time record by a couple strokes.
Well, this family,
it's a joke.
The Kim family, which has been the dictators of North Korea since 1949 or 48 or something, they are really, really horrible people. They have killed 3.5 million Korean people. They killed 40-some thousand of our men in the Korean War. These are bad guys. My Unelected President novel, there's a kind of an executive summary of the Kim family, and it's just horrible. They murder their own relatives. They murdered a guy with VX gas, injected the half brother of the current leader was murdered in Singapore or somewhere. These are bad people. They're not nuts. So when Trump recently talked about fire and fury if they shot missiles that landed around Guam, he backed down. Now he's back to talking. I think their mindset is they have had a lot of success extorting money out of the United States and other countries, Japan, from Bill Clinton and the Japanese. And that they can intimidate the whole world. There's also a notion that once you get nukes, no one will ever attack you. And in my Unelected President book, I say the president in my novel, the guy named Mike Medlock, he says in no uncertain terms that that's not the case. He doesn't say it. He doesn't talk like politicians. He just does things. But he takes out North Korea, and he's basically saying, if you're a small country with nukes, we can take you out. We can simultaneously hit you everywhere, and your nukes will mean little or nothing. Another thing that bugs me about all this discussion about North Korea is the idea that they have to have a nuke that they can put on an ICBM and send it here from North Korea. No, they don't. They can put a nuke on a cruise missile, and they have these whiskey-class Russian submarines. They're diesel submarines, but they can carry cruise missiles, and they can put a nuclear warhead on that, and they can bring that submarine over to off the coast of California, Hawaii, or Guam, and fire that missile from short range. They can also put Scud missiles with nuclear warheads on them. Scud missile is just an intermediate missile, 500 miles or something range. They can put them in shipping containers or put them on some cargo ship and sail that over so that it's within range of L.A. and Seattle and San Francisco and so forth. So they don't need ICBMs. ICBMs are kind of a bad way to attack because everybody knows who fired it. Right. You shoot it out of a submarine, and then the submarine disappears back underwater.
Yeah, you fire a missile and you also say, "I'm over here."
Yeah,
which in this day and age is a suicide pact.
Well, and you fire an ICBM against the United States, before your ICBM hits, your country will be destroyed because we have nuclear weapons in Japan, we have nuclear weapons in South Korea, we have nuclear weapons in Taiwan, we have nuclear weapons on on ships, surface ships. You saw them fired the conventional versions at Syria. We have ships, we got submarines, we got land bases all over the Pacific. Our nukes will be exploding in North Korea before the one North Korea fired hits the United States.
Well, we'll probably shoot it out of the sky.
Well, I hope we can do that, but I think I know we can shoot their missiles out of the sky when they're accelerating off the launch pad. Once they hit hypersonic speed, I'm not so confident that we can shoot them down.
Right.
But we don't need to be afraid to go to nuclear war with a country the size of North Korea. Them getting nukes and now I think the American people are intimidated by nukes, but they shouldn't be. North Korean nukes.
There's not a lot of consolation that we would destroy them in a nuclear war if you're the one of the few casualties relatively. So,
and there's Mike Medlock in my Unelected President book. He despises the notion that we should let the other side take the first shot for political reasons, because the first shot in the World War II. Technically, we fired the first shot. We sank some little mini submarine of theirs. But the first shot was Pearl Harbor. That killed over 2,000 of our guys. And now we're talking about nuclear war with North Korea. We're going to let them take the first shot? Well, who had that idea? I don't think it was somebody who lived in L.A. or San Francisco or Seattle.
Well, it would serve a bigger purpose as well. I suspect that Hiroshima and Nagasaki calmed almost everybody down for a while. I don't think.
What do you mean?
We fired two weapons that people didn't really know existed. Seems. You'd have to ask a war historian, but it seems like the world was a little calmer for a while.
Well,
it changed the face of warfare.
People are intimidated by nukes, overly so.
Right.
They like the notion that there's going to be a nuclear winter. That's nonsense. It was rebuked. The people behind the hysteria about nukes are the anti-war crowd and the goofballs, who are against.
Similar to being against nuclear power.
Yeah, they're against nuclear power because of the China syndrome and all that.
Well, yeah, the three-eyed fish in The Simpsons.
Right.
It's just.
Well, when I was a kid, there was all these movies about giant crabs and stuff because of the nukes. But we've already had two big nuclear power plant failures. One was Chernobyl, where they thought we were going to have 40,000 people die from the fallout. It was 12 kids died from thyroid cancer, which comes only from nuclear radiation exposure. And there were a number of people who died in the Chernobyl plant because they heroically volunteered, or maybe stupidly volunteered, to go in there and try to ameliorate things, and they absorbed. They either deliberately or unwittingly absorbed deadly radiation, but essentially the 40,000 people didn't die. And people worry about a dirty bomb. Chernobyl was the biggest dirty bomb you're ever going to see, and it killed 12 kids from thyroid cancer. And then we had Fukushima. Nobody died in Fukushima, and nobody ever will die. There's nobody who has gotten hit with radiation that's going to make them die down the road. Nobody. And yet the idiot Germans decide to abolish nuclear power because of a tidal wave hitting Fukushima. How many tidal waves do you get in Bavaria?
Yeah, I heard there was the 3 Mile Island incident as well.
Yeah.
And Thomas Sowell said, I think he said 2 people died, and one of them died racing away from it in their car. Yeah. Freaked out about it.
Well, nobody died from the radiation. I lived in that area. That was in Pennsylvania.
1979.
I lived in New Jersey, southern New Jersey at the time. And it was just a little bit of radiation escaped from some escape valve. But people need to get over this notion that if we have a nuclear war with China or Russia, that the United States will be nothing but dead people and ashes. I even heard a guy said, people were saying, well, we don't think that North Korean missiles are accurate, the ICBMs. And he said, well, they don't have to be accurate. Maybe they aim at L.A. and hit San Francisco. Well, more likely, if they're inaccurate, they aim at L.A. and they hit the ocean. Well, they hit the ocean, or they hit the Death Valley, or they hit Mexico.
The Delta in the Bay Area, which is sparsely populated, if at all.
I think maybe Mexico is closer to L.A. than San Francisco. But the idea that an inaccurate missile goes 500 miles north and hits another big city. That's not the way it works.
Right.
And I did a speech to Freedom Fest several years ago about the actual effects of a nuclear war. If you used, I calculated the number of nuclear warheads, 1 megaton nuclear warheads, which is a really big nuclear warhead. I think Hiroshima was like 12 kilotons. So 1 megaton is like the mother of all nukes. The Russians, the Soviets detonated 1 megaton because that's their mindset. Everything is huge.
Nagasaki was about 20 kilotons.
Right, but it did less damage.
Hiroshima was 15.
Well,
the equivalent.
It was 12. I mean, it depends on who you ask.
Right.
It's not precise, but anyway, 1 megaton is a huge warhead. The number of 1 megaton warheads it would take to devastate New York City, all 5 boroughs, but not the suburbs, is 53. It would take 53 1 megaton bombs to make New York City look like the pictures of Hiroshima. By the way, Hiroshima wasn't even destroyed. Those are just the bad parts of the city. The train station was still operating, and there was one guy got injured in Hiroshima, and he went the next day, got on the train, and went back to where he worked, which happened to be Nagasaki. And he was telling his boss about this huge bomb that went off in Hiroshima just as the Nagasaki bomb went off. And he was injured by both bombs. He's the only guy who survived both bombs. And he died like 10 years ago at age 93.
Right.
And Hiroshima, if you look up Hiroshima on Google it and then click on images, it's a gorgeous, fabulous, stunning city. And it could have been that 3 weeks after the bomb if they had had the money.
Did you say 10 megatons?
It was 12.
No. You said something
about
1
megaton. 1 megaton bombs. You need 53 1 megaton bombs to devastate the 5 boroughs of New York City.
Yeah, here's a map of the 1 megaton.
Well, the viewers, the listeners can't see it.
They can't see it, but you get the,
Well, that's a map of the 1 megaton. I don't know what that map is about, fallout or something. The 1 megaton destroys 6 square miles. It's a circle.
Yeah, that little one's the fireball radius, and this is the air blast.
Yeah, well, the fireball is what I'm talking about.
Right,
the air blast is no big deal when you're a certain distance away from it.
Well, yeah, they're saying the air blast is universal injuries and a lot of fatalities. But once you get outside the air blast, that's not thermal radiation. That's third degree burns.
Who's putting this out?
It's a nuke map, nuclear secrecy. I think we looked at it a few years ago. The nuke map is on something called nuclearsecrecy.com. I don't like the name of it, to be honest.
Well, I don't.
I think we've looked at this map before, or something equivalent to it.
Yeah, I'm a little. There's an awful lot of stuff on the internet that exaggerates on the internet and everywhere else that exaggerates the effects of nuclear war. I did that speech at the Freedom Fest in conjunction with an engineer, and we worked together. And there's about a 6-mile total devastation radius. And people worry about radiation sickness. If you got enough radiation to die, you're already dead from the heat. It's like 2 million degrees Fahrenheit at ground zero. So if you're close enough to get radiation, you're close enough to be vaporized. If you're farther away so that you don't get vaporized, then you're talking about
radiation's too low.
Yeah, the radiation won't kill you.
Interesting.
So you're talking about flying glass and stuff like that. But total universal casualty. That's not what I recall. And we had the Nagasaki blast actually killed fewer people because it was mountainous. And this map you had the thing blowing off, looked like it was blowing up in Central Park. You got a lot of high-rise steel and concrete buildings.
Well, there's even some topography to New York. But if you're detonating it a couple thousand feet up, I don't think it's going to matter, at least in New York. Well, other than the buildings.
Some of the people who survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki were at ground zero, but they were in a basement. They were working on bomb shelters. They were in the bomb shelter, working on the bomb shelter. So that was a relatively small nuclear weapon, but the nuclear weapons
compared to today.
Well, I think the nuclear weapons today, it's secret, but I think they're 50 kiloton, 100 kiloton, 200 kiloton. I think the 1 megaton was done by the Soviets because they're just,
it's a nice round number.
They're brutish,
right?
And they're very big on
measuring nukes.
They're very big on overwhelming, ridiculous, ludicrous force.
Yeah, overwhelming force is ludicrous.
But think about it, a nuclear bomb, and all bombs are spherical in terms of the explosion.
The explosion, right?
The force is spherical. The target is flat. So you get a two-dimensional target and a three-dimensional bomb. So you're wasting all the energy.
Yeah, half the energy is going up, and it's not doing anything.
More than half.
Well, half of it's going up.
Yeah,
half of it's, and some portion of it's going out, which also does no damage.
Well,
right.
Some of it is pounding itself into the ground, where it doesn't do much damage.
Correct.
Some of it is going sideways, which is what does the damage, and most of it is going up. The mushroom cloud and the fireball and all that are using most, and plus you got like 3, 4, 5 million degrees Fahrenheit at ground zero. Everybody died when you got to 300 degrees, so you're just wasting all those degrees. If you can do more damage and kill more people and do more damage with a conventional bombing attack, a carpet bombing type thing, you have the same number of tonnage of TNT as the equivalent nukes, but the nukes,
the center of the explosion is
well, you would have
different places.
You would have 500 explosions, right. and so it would be more efficient. A nuke, the thing that's neat about nukes from a weapon standpoint is it's a very small package before it explodes.
Right.
That's the trick with nukes. The fact that it's radiation is sort of irrelevant. Fallout dissipates to harmlessness in about 2 weeks. On and on. But the notion that anybody who was within 20 miles dies of radiation poisoning 3 years later, that's just nonsense. The radiation, what you can get from radiation is leukemia if you're an adult, and if you're a kid, you get thyroid cancer. But if you're close enough to get that stuff, now the fallout from Chernobyl did cause 12 cases of thyroid cancer, but that was really massive.
Well, and that's old technology that's probably not even in use anymore. I've read some stuff that contemporary nuclear power, forgetting nuclear bombs for a second, contemporary nuclear power is so incredibly safe.
Right.
And gets safer every year that they're allowed to develop it. Here in the U.S., we haven't been able to. The nuclear plants are how old these days?
Well,
40 plus years.
I think they're starting to build a couple. They got a couple that are in big financial difficulty, and I think
maybe Perry will allow.
Westinghouse
Energy Secretary Perry will allow them to be built as opposed to the previous administration.
Westinghouse is a company that was big in nuclear power plants, and they just went bankrupt. But Fukushima was a modern power plant. It was hit by a freaking tidal wave, and the tidal wave just wiped out all the pumps and so forth for keeping it cool, and it still didn't kill anybody. It was a mess, and it's an expensive cleanup, and the Japanese freaked out, and they're starting to get rid of power plants, which is stupid because
don't put them on coastline.
Put
them on a mountain.
Yeah, well, they have plenty of mountains, but the Japanese, one of the big problems they had in World War II is they have no resources. It's a rocky place. Right. Yeah, they have trouble feeding themselves. They don't have any fuel, and I think nuclear power is a fabulous idea for Japan for electricity, and for France and Germany for similar reasons. Anyway,
it's a good idea in general, but it's an even better idea for countries like that where there's not a lot of options. They're not. I don't think they're drilling for oil in Japan.
No, they're not, and Japan actually has a population about the same size as Russia. A lot of people think Russia is this huge country. The Soviet Union was bigger. Russia ain't the Soviet Union. But my main point is people are terrified of having a war with North Korea because they have nukes. Well, better now than later. And I suspect we could probably prevent them with a simultaneous anti-artillery attack and a simultaneous blanketing of the country to prevent their missiles from taking off. We did all that simultaneously. I suspect they wouldn't be able to hurt even Seoul, Korea. Maybe I'm mistaken. They might get off a shot or two with a cruise missile or something that made it. But I don't think they could destroy all of Seoul by any means. Seoul is a big place. It would do damage. But what are we going to do? Wait until they can do more?
Right.
I think it's time to. I think the president should evacuate all the military dependents, the civilian dependents of the military people. I think that would send a message that would cause the whole world to go, uh-oh.
Yeah.
And until he does stuff like that, all this talk about all options are on the table. The people have been hearing that from the American commander-in-chief for 50 years. And we haven't won a war in all those 50 years. Some people say, what about Desert Storm? Well, it lasted 100 hours. We killed more of our own men than the enemy killed our men. Calling that a war is a bit of an exaggeration.
One more topic before we sign off. You told me about this right beforehand. The story about Google using its power to silence sort of opinions they don't like. There was a website that published some comparison article, basically comparing.
Well, it said why the alt-right is not equivalent of the Nazis. And I didn't see the article, but I guess it's a bullet point. The Nazis advocated this, the alt-right advocates this other thing. So, but anyway, yeah, Google may order them to take it down.
Yeah, they basically, the people that wrote it describe it as merely distinguishing the many differences between the alt-right and literal Nazis. And basically they got this, I'm trying to find the name of it. Do you remember the...
No, I just heard on the radio coming over here.
The website's called The Liberty Conservative, and they were basically contacted by Google's AdSense that they need to modify or remove the violating content to meet AdSense policies, and they like I said, they describe it as an article distinguishing the differences between the alt-right and the literal Nazis. I'd like to think we can, write a slight distinction between the two. The alt-right, I don't think you can attribute. I mean, I guess the Charlottesville murder, you might. The Charlottesville vehicular murder could be attributed to the alt-right. But let's say that's the case. Let's say that was a premeditated alt-right murder. How many more of those would you need to get to literal Nazis?
Yeah,
a couple.
The Nazis, I think the number of people who died in the European World War II was somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 million. Most of them Russian civilians.
Using the ad platforms, it's not the first time I've heard of it. Prager University has been complaining that their YouTube videos are being marked as... there's a content warning on them. By default, you don't have a content warning, but these ones do, and they're not. They're just conservative-leaning stuff that some people would find controversial or surprising. But it's not picture. It's not nude pictures. It's not swear words. Prager University, you never hear a swear word. The guy's super Christian or Jewish. Well, I don't remember.
Google.
He's one of the two. He doesn't. There's no way this content needs to be. Given a warning for people like it's a pack of cigarettes.
Well, Google is an extremely powerful company, and a couple more stunts like this, and they're going to find that they're less powerful because the government will break them up or something. Google is based. What city are they in? They're here.
Mountain View.
Mountain View, yeah.
I mean, they're so big now; they're everywhere. But
they need to move their headquarters to Kansas, so that they start having a more normal perspective. Because here you got San Francisco Bay Area liberals, home of Nancy Pelosi and Berkeley and all that stuff. Bay Area liberals setting standards for the planet Earth on what articles you can, and you're going to get ridiculous things like saying it's illegal to write an article showing that the alt-right is not the same as the Nazis. By the way, I don't know what the alt-right is. I'm not in favor of it, and I use the words left and right. I think they are useful, but the alt-right sounds like I think the average person probably thinks there's something wrong morally with the alt-right, and I suspect that's not the case, but I don't know, and I don't care.
Yeah, I became aware of the alt-right through
Breitbart.
Milo Yiannopoulos talking about it. Oh. And he used to work at Breitbart, but He's actually gone out of his way to explain how he's not part of the alt-right, and it's fairly convincing. Now, the alt-right likes him, I think, depending on how you define who they are. But, news media outlets, I saw an interview with Milo where he described this. News media outlets are saying that the alt-right is this racist, Nazi, anti-Semitic group of people, and simultaneously the media is crowning Milo the queen of this. Pun intended, a gay Jew who can't stop talking about his black boyfriends. This is the head of the alt-right. These two things don't match up.
Gentile black boyfriends.
My quick take on the alt-right seems to be, what I've seen, it kind of started off as just a bunch of trolls. And trolls pick the thing that pisses people off the most.
Right.
And they found through trial and error that Nazi propaganda and memes and anti-Jew stuff really got people riled up. So that's what they did.
Well,
they will use whatever tactic is necessary. But the notion that there's all these 20, 25-year-old anti-Semitic kids in the United States, it just doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Well, I don't believe it. I did a Facebook post yesterday where I said there's this iron triangle of attention seekers, and they are the Antifa, the white supremacists, Nazis, neo-Nazis, and the media. The media, the news media, not talking about the whole media, but the news media. The news media wants you to change your channel from watching a football game or watching a soap opera to watch the news media and the pundits and all that. How do they do that? They need violence. They need people screaming at each other.
Right. And
they need extreme behavior. You cannot attract attention with a gentile, genteel debate between a couple of academics, low-key academics, discussing the relative benefits and disadvantages of tariffs. That's not going to get people to switch the TV over to the news media. So the news media is essentially saying implicitly, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some explicit staging and so forth, is saying, hey, it's really neat that the Antifa people found some actual fascists instead of claiming that the Republicans were fascists.
Right. Antifa's been fighting with people that for months, weeks, whatever.
Imaginary.
That aren't actually. Yeah, there's sort of. People don't really believe it.
They
now
wish
in Charlottesville they finally.
But that's because there's a bunch of other losers who say, "Hey, these Antifa guys are creating a huge market for white supremacists to get attention." So the Antifa people want to be on TV. The David Duke losers, they want to be on TV. How are they ever going to get on TV other than screaming
at
Heil Hitler and swinging baseball bats at people with Make America Great Again hats? And the media are part of this. The media are part of this because they need this kind of stuff to get you to stop. They go, all we're going to do now is cover Charlottesville for 2 days. And people turn off the soap opera and they turn off the football games or the baseball games and they watch the coverage because there's violence. So the media and the Antifa people and the white supremacists are allies. The media compensates these losers on both sides with publicity, which is of value. And the media, the people standing there holding a microphone, yes, I'm here next to the race riot. They want to be on TV. The people in the riot want to be on TV, and the people with the microphones want to be on TV, and they want somebody watching. So the whole thing is to get attention. I just did a post yesterday watching all the rescues in Houston, and I said a drowning man will grasp at a straw, and a drowning Antifa will grasp at a white supremacist, and the white supremacist will save him, because this is real. All this screaming and Heil Hitler and holding up or saying, Jews, you will not replace us. This is all people who want attention saying whatever they need to say to get attention. They don't give a damn about Jews. They don't give a damn about Nazi. They probably couldn't pass a 10-question quiz on the tenets of Nazism. But if they, you and I discussed in a previous podcast, you and I and Mike, who's not here today, But we discussed the fact that if a couple of teenage boys paint a swastika on a synagogue, it'll be on the news the next day. But if they paint a Presbyterian suck on a Presbyterian church, this is not going to make the news. They want to be in the news, but they paint the swastika and oh, Hitler's back and the Nazis are back and and everybody gets all upset. It's a bunch of nonsense. When Hitler was on the rise, his party had a number of seats in Parliament. They were a relatively small number, and it would go up and down. They had some good years and bad years where the Nazis had more. The Nazis in the United States, they don't have a dog catcher in this country. There's not a single elected official who said, I'm a Nazi, elect me.
You can't say things critical of the people fighting the Nazis without them calling you a Nazi. So forget calling yourself a Nazi. You can't even get there. Hope to have any power.
Or even a libertarian. How many libertarian people who ran on the libertarian ticket, not the Republican ticket, how many libertarians are there in Congress? Zero. And the libertarian is a powerful movement, but there's zero in Congress. And the Nazis don't have a city councilman or a county elected official in the most redneck county in America. They got nothing. They essentially don't exist. Even talking about them is a bad idea because it sort of suggests there's more to it than there is.
Yeah, even if it's weather, that they send these weather people to the place where it's the windiest and the waves are the highest to get the good video in the background. They're not sending anybody to tell you. There's a comedian named Lewis Black. He said the easiest job in the world is weatherman in San Diego. How's the weather, Lou? Nice. Yeah. Back to you. Yeah. This doesn't make for good TV and news. You got to have signs flying in the background and trees falling down and waves crashing.
Yeah, the Meteorologists Association voted San Diego had the best weather in the continental U.S. But we had the Loma Prieta earthquake out here. You were in elementary school, and I was on my way to pick you up, and I thought the wheels were falling off my car. I pulled over to the side of the road, and I noticed there's like eight other people pulled over the side of the road looking at their wheels.
Yeah, we were playing on a playground. Yeah, and it freaked. One kid fell off the monkey bars. And nobody got hurt, but it was fine.
But you saw on TV, they showed scenes of Cal Hollow, which is an area where the buildings are built on fill. In San
Francisco.
Yeah, they just dumped dirt into the bay and built buildings on it, which is very bad soil for an earthquake. And then you saw pictures of the Cypress structure, which is a double-decker freeway that the upper deck collapsed on the lower deck. My wife was
now known as the Embarcadero, right?
No, the Embarcadero is the shore in San Francisco. But my wife was supposed to be on the lower deck of the Cypress structure when it
580.
I forget what number it is, 580 or 880, something like that.
Castro Valley.
No, the Cypress structure is in Oakland.
Oh, excuse me.
Anyway, my wife was in a meeting in Oakland. She was supposed to go back to San Francisco and take the lower deck of the Cypress structure, but the meeting ran late, so that's why she didn't die there. But you saw a zillion videos of buildings burning in Cow Hollow or the district built on fill in San Francisco. It's a little bit west of Fisherman's Wharf. And you saw a million videos of the Cypress structure. And it's like, this is what's happened in Northern California. Well, it's what happened to the Cypress structure and Cal Hollow. Right. It's not what happened to the whole area. They just point at the two places that were...
Yeah, even a block or two away. You wouldn't see the same thing.
Absolutely.
And certainly 30 miles east or whatever,
they pointed,
you had a few books fall off the shelf, right? Maybe
not in Loma Prieta. We had another earthquake where I was in a bathtub and it felt like a train hit the house, and it wasn't shaking. It was just bam. And I told my wife, I said, I don't know where the epicenter of that was. Whenever we have an earthquake here, the next day the newspaper shows the epicenter. I said, I don't know where the epicenter was, but I think it's on the next block. And it was. It was right it was on the next street. But
not as strong, but you were closer to it, so it didn't matter.
But it was very strong, and it was no shaking.
Well, not as strong as Loma Prieta.
That knocked books off, and that broke champagne glasses and stuff like that. But
first world problems.
Yeah,
We lost
it
our
didn't.
champagne glass in the earthquake of '92.
Well, none of the computers or TVs fell down. So, but that was bad. That was just one big wham. But anyway, the media focuses the camera on, it may be that there's only one tiny little bit of damage to one property, but the cameras will all focus on that property, and the properties next door may be fine, and the media will not tell you that, almost never. So the media exaggerates, like with Hiroshima, all the pictures you see of Hiroshima. If you really want to know what happened to Hiroshima in August of 1945, you should have pictures of all the neighborhoods of Hiroshima. And if you had 10 pictures in a mosaic of all the neighborhoods where they positioned a camera, so that you got 10 different neighborhoods, you would see 2 neighborhoods with devastation, and the rest of Hiroshima, or maybe 5, the rest of Hiroshima was normal. But people, that doesn't attract viewers.
Right.
They want sensational coverage, so they'll let you look through a keyhole that's pointed at the one house that collapsed and caught fire.
Yeah, we should get a lot of that good video coming up here at Berkeley in a few weeks. Ben Shapiro's scheduled to speak there, and then I think a week and a half later, Milo's having 4 days of, he calls it Free Speech Week. Day 1 is feminists. On a Sunday, I'm going to do everything I can to try to witness some of that.
In this to witness it, man, you were
I'm
there.
You were there. I'm not going with a MAGA hat.
I
wouldn't wear one of those anyway.
You went over there for the riots, the nighttime riots in Berkeley. Was that Milo?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were there for that. And I thought the article you wrote, which is on the internet, was the best coverage by anybody on earth of that thing, the best news coverage. And you were accompanied by an off-duty police officer.
Yeah, he gave good perspective while it was happening, too.
Yeah, well, and also maybe a little protection.
Why aren't the cops coming in? They keep giving warnings, and we're coming in 10 minutes, and then they don't come, which just tells them they're not coming.
Yeah.
And I have pictures of.
But anyway, I don't think you should have been there for that, and I definitely don't think you should be going to a new one now that they got all these people beating people up, and the antifa is Governor Jerry Brown's base, and now I must say that the Berkeley mayor did denounce antifa.
Yeah, I saw that
recently. And
one of the observations I made, which I found a lot of sort of, I guess you call bipartisan appreciation of that article, was 80% of the crowd was just sitting there watching. Yeah. I mean, but
that's not what the cameras show.
Right. Yeah. No. If you go to where the trouble is, yeah, you could probably get cracked in the skull. But if you're quietly watching, that it was actually a safe event otherwise. But anyways,
and recently
we'll probably get to talk about it on the next podcast.
Alrighty. But I don't want to hear a first-hand account from you. You watch the biased, sensational coverage on TV because you're liable to get killed over there. The stuff is escalating. It's probably going to fall back after it goes too far. But right now, I think it's too dangerous to go to those things. By the way, I want Donald Trump to make a speech in Berkeley. And if he doesn't, it suggests that Berkeley's a no-go zone for the President of the United States. We don't have any no-go zones. So he should come here and make a speech and bring the 82nd Airborne with him. And I'm serious. He should come here and make a speech. Ronald Reagan, when he ran for governor of California, one of his main 2 focuses was confronting the Berkeley people. One of the main 2 the other one was confronting the anti-war people back in the 80s. The 70s. So he and a U.S. senator named S.I. Hayakawa, they both made their political careers by confronting these Berkeley people. Confronting the Berkeley people may not be popular in Berkeley, but it's popular everywhere else in the United States. Yeah. So I think Trump should come here and make a speech in Berkeley, maybe Alameda or something, where he can control the crowd better.
All right. Thanks for listening.